Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to have this conversation because you guys clearly are doing a lot in your communities, and we all want to hear about how all of us can do more and be inspired by your stories. So, there's a lot going on in our country right now following the murder of George Floyd. I think a lot of unrest was already bubbling underneath the surface because of Breonna Taylor's murder, because of Ahmaud Arbery's murder, and so many other murders and violence perpetuated against Black people in these last few months. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to address that unrest. But before we do, I'm going to read some statements, and I want you guys to suggest whether or not you agree with the statement by raising your hand. So I'll read the statement. If you agree, raise your hand. If you don't, keep your hand down. You ready? Okay. Black Lives Matter. All right, put your hand down. Police brutality exists. All right. White privilege exists. Okay. Systemic racism hurts communities all over the nation. I have done enough to stop these problems in my own community. Okay, now before I see that none of you guys have raised your hand, I didn't raise my hand either. And I think that's because until these problems have ended, none of us have done enough, right? We all have to keep working. We all have to keep trying to make sure that, police brutality ends, that systemic racism ends, and that the people most affected by these problems are helped. So Grace, I'm gonna start with you. So you didn't raise your hand for this statement that you've done enough. Tell me about what you've done in your community.
So I've been a social worker for 6 years, so I've done a lot of advocacy for other things. Montana, the population of Black people in Montana is 0.6%. So there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of negativity around speaking out against racism because it's just something that exists because people don't know. And so for me, having conversations with my family and friends, talking to them about why saying all lives matter is not proper, and it really doesn't speak to Black Lives Matter, which is what we're talking about. We're not talking about all lives, we're talking about Black lives. So having those conversations and learning from people what they know and what they don't know, I think it's really having a goal about why you want to have a conversation with them and coming at them not confrontational, but really let me learn about you so that I can help you learn more about what the problem is and where it really exists. I work for a large healthcare organization. We did one stand in solidarity thing. And so I said, what else are we doing? We employ hundreds of thousands of people all over the country. What are we doing? And they sent me this short list of 7 things that we could do. And so I've just really pushed back at them like, no, we need to do these things. Don't suggest that these are things we could do. Like we need to implement some different things. And then obviously posting on social media, which brings awareness, gets people involved, but it really is the tip of the iceberg of the things that you can do.
Now, I want to talk to you about something that you said. So you said that you've been talking to people in your community who have been talking about all lives matter. What has that conversation been like, and what kind of pushback have you gotten from people?
People are scared to recognize that they have privilege, and they think that if they acknowledge they have privilege, it will take something away from them. And really noting that, yes, as a white person, I have privilege. That doesn't, disregard anything that I've been through or make me a bad person because I'm white. We just need to acknowledge that Black people have suffered for 400 years and that we're still at a place where they're suffering. It's not taking anything away from you to note that they matter.
I'm really surrounded by a lot of people that understand what's going on, and a lot of people who are taking accountability for what's going on. And a lot of my girlfriends who just want to know what they can do. A lot of my, white friends, they just want to know what they can do. And they're just checking up on me and just wondering how they can play their role as far as in a friendship with friends of color. So I've been really lucky to not have run into that.
But I know that you've been doing a lot in your community. Can you tell me about what steps you've taken with regard to advocacy for Black Lives Matter and for, being against police brutality and being for anti-racism?
Yeah, I just actually had a meeting. So I work for a boxing company that partnered with ESPN. So I'm around a lot of just high-powered men, specifically men. And I say that because sometimes I feel like Black women are overlooked. So I've had to educate them on just what has been happening with the Breonna Taylors of the world. So I was just in a meeting with them and how we can kind of have that open conversation for at least the employees to understand where we're at. And me being pretty much the only African-American woman to be on staff here, it was kind of a big responsibility for me to at least explain to them how important this is and how much they need to understand the differences and the privilege. I don't know how to point out someone else's privilege. They have to acknowledge that themselves. And I don't have the time to educate them on why it is important. They have to educate themselves. So I'm still kind of figuring out how I can be a huge part in it. But for now, it's just having the conversations, the really uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right in that it takes just starting those uncomfortable conversations. And it's so important, I think, to do that, especially in your own communities, because people are more apt to listen to people in their circles than they are to random people on television or on social media. So Savannah, I know that you're starting law school this fall. Do you feel like you have like an elevated sense of responsibility to speak out about these issues because you're about to join the legal industry?
Oh, absolutely. As a lawyer, you have such a large responsibility to your community, if you so decide. And with this Black Lives Matter movement, I have felt that responsibility so deeply in realizing I may need to dedicate my life to this work. I may need to serve my community in ways I didn't realize before. And just to be more acutely aware of what's going on in my community, the systemic racism that does exist, and what we can do in our laws to help alleviate that and to change it, to eliminate it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like, you feel like as an attorney, you've got a target on your back. Now, Joe, I know that you and I think have both been, we've had our private conversations about what's going on. And I think you share with me some frustration, right? And that like, sometimes I'll see people who are silent. Sometimes I'll see people in my own communities who are saying all lives matter. And sometimes I'm frustrated. How often do you feel that frustration, or do you not feel that frustration?
No, I'm frustrated every day. And it's really tiring, like emotionally and mentally, because for one, I'm biracial. So I have a whole side of a family who just doesn't get it. And it's like gotten to the point where they've told me that the documentary 13th is false news, false information. And it's just like mind blowing to me. I'm taking my time and my energy to try to explain to you. And it's just like, can you just care because I care about the situation? And I grew up in a predominantly white area. I was the only person of color in my high school. So like, I don't even want to go back to that area because I don't feel comfortable. And then it's like at work, I chose a non-conventional career path. I do landscaping. And so it's a predominantly white male workforce. So again, I'm a minority there. And then like our clientele is very high end, very, very high end. So it's just like, I'm going to work and I'm selling flowers that cost so much money. And it just feels like people are unbothered by the situation. So it's like, I have it here at the family level where I'm frustrated, and then I'm frustrated at work. So it's making me feel like I just want to be surrounded by Black people because they understand what's going on. But now I feel like I'm being too divisive within my own self. You know what I mean? So it's just like, I feel like I'm constantly at war with all these emotions. And so I actually called one of my senators that I remain close with in Delaware, and we talked on the phone for like 30 minutes. I was like, what do I need to do? Because what we've been doing has not been working. I agree with everything that's going on right now, but I just feel like I want to mobilize and regroup and rethink like going forward. And I actually had a really good thought. Well, I think it's a good thought. But I think it would be really interesting to see if the police were mandated to live in the townships and counties or cities that they work in, kind of like how firemen are. So then they have like a communal sense for the community and a respect for it because they live there. You know, they know little Johnny from down the block isn't really a gangbanger, or you know he's not really a bad kid just because of the color of his skin. You know he's a good kid because you live there, you work there, and you start to see familiar faces every day, versus living in the suburbs in a nice area and then having to come to work today and just feeling those differences. I think that would be really interesting to see play out. I don't know how we would do that.
But yeah, I think it is an exciting idea. And I wonder if there are some communities across the nation, because I know that the police, the system itself is so disjointed, you know, because it's run by like different counties and different cities and funded differently. But I think it is a really cool idea. And I'm glad that what sounds like your frustration has turned and fueled you into passion and action, because I think that is a healthy way to express that, sometimes anger and sometimes frustration, by saying like, I'm so angry, what can I do, rather than just being angry all the time, which is something that I know I've broken down and just been like, I'm mad every day. It's so frustrating. So I think that's healthy and powerful. Besides, you know, calling your senators and thinking about these ideas, what else have you done, you know, for advocacy in your community?
I mean, for me personally, I'm just really trying to stay updated on the facts. I'm gonna watch 13th again tonight for like the 4th time, just because it takes me a while to learn things and to process. So like every time I watch it, I learn something new. And then too, I've taken it upon myself to really learn like when all of the local voting is happening, because I'm definitely misinformed and uneducated on, I only vote for national, for the president. And I know that's a mistake on myself, but it's just not something that's taught to vote locally. So I'm really trying to think and plan, how do I find out about this stuff? And then how do we make it sexy and cool and hip to the younger people to want to come and vote? Because that's how, but that's where like the changes.
There's like so much of a misconception, and people aren't educated on how important our local representatives, and even at the state level, like they control everything. People just think, oh, I'm going to vote for the president because he makes all the laws.
Right.
But no, it's all those people that come around and knock on your door and say, oh, I'm running for House District 92 and I'm in your district. And you say to them, these are the things that are important to me, and what are you doing for them? Like, those people matter just as much as the president matters.
Say it, Grace. And you're so right, because I mean, people forget about, you know, the difference between the federal government and the state government, but like, and forget that, you know, not only does like your governor have great broad power in your own state, but those local officials that you vote for. What are your thoughts on social media activism? Because I think we've seen, you know, two opposite ends of the spectrum.
I think it's really about your intent. I've seen a lot of people that have said like, oh, I've lost so many followers because I've started posting about Black Lives Matter. I haven't lost any followers because my followers know where I stand. So if you're just jumping on this bandwagon because you want people to think that you care, but you're not doing anything behind the scenes, I mean, I do what you want, but you're not really making any change. If you're posting to educate people, to have those hard conversations with people, encouraging people to sign petitions, like, keep posting those things. Those things will make changes. Don't post because you don't want people to say you're a bad person.
I agree, Grace. Throughout this whole thing, I have really been intentional with what I post and meaning to amplify Black voices in particular, because it's not my story to tell at the end of the day. So I'm trying to listen more than I speak.
And that is powerful, especially when you're using that time to learn, like listen to the voices and educate yourself. Like, you know, whether it's reading, I know you asked in our group meet the other day, like, what can I be reading as I'm going into law school? So whether it's reading or watching documentaries or, you know, reading articles online, there's so much that we can be doing, and we've got a lot of time, especially, you know, some of us who are still locked in the house because of stay-at-home orders across the nation. So I'm glad for me, like the place where I sit is like, I'm glad when people post on social media. I just really want people to do more in addition to that. Because I've seen some people say like, stop just posting on social media. I'm like, yes, stop just posting on social media. You should be posting, but you should also donate or protest or say something or convince people in your community that, you know, there's another way of thought that they haven't considered yet. I know I went to a protest a week or so ago. I went to a couple protests, and I just felt so empowered afterwards. It was like saying like, no justice, no peace. We're like walking in the street at some point, and they were like, whose street? Our street. And it was like, you just feel this really proud moment. Like, we can do something, like we can have control and we can affect our communities. Have you guys seen any protests like in your communities, or have you gone to any?
Yeah, I went to one last week. I do agree, it's very empowering. You know, just walking alongside people who are all chanting the same thing, believing in the same thing. wanting to make changes. So I think if you have the opportunity to do it, definitely get out there. It can fuel your fire a little bit to really make some changes.
Yeah, no, there's a lot going on here, but for me, I'm quarantined to the MGM currently. We're in this thing called a bubble. We get tested twice a week, so I'm not really allowed to leave ever for the next 3 months. So I unfortunately have not been able to get out there, but you can see them on the strip. They close the strip every night, and it makes me emotional watching it from afar, because I'm like, this is what makes the difference in these types of situations. And though Vegas, it's a big city, it's a very small movement here, so I can only imagine the presence that's felt and the difference that's being made in other cities that have been protesting for weeks. So I'm proud to see it from afar, and I'm rooting them on from afar from my window view over here.
And sorry, you had to be stuck in a hotel room.
Yeah, so I'm doing what I can as far as social media goes. For me, as far as social media goes, I think it's great whether you're posting, whether your intent is in the right place or not. I just think being able to see it every single day is a good thing. And whether your intent is in the right place or not, you will eventually get to that place where you can agree and understand. So I'm all for the social media post. As often as possible, I think everyone needs to see it.
There's also a lot of false news on social media, which makes it very finicky. I remember someone sent me this picture of like rioters that hopped the White House fence and the lawn was on fire, and I was like, I live right here, that's not happening. I don't know who photoshopped that, but like, please just fact check your sources. That's all I ask before you post.
I've seen people post the same post about, they just posted horrific things about George Floyd and, acts he may or may not have committed before his murder. And I think I saw a thread of somebody was like, this is some lady he attacked. And then there was a response to this thread that was like, no, this is actually a picture of a woman from, this many years ago in a completely different country. This had nothing to do with George Floyd. And I was just like, why are you, it's so frustrating seeing that spread of misinformation. And I think that is exactly one of the reasons why you do have to keep, just feeding people with information that actually is accurate, that's been verified, and that can motivate people to action. All right, so last thoughts. Obviously, while all this is happening, we are still in the midst of a global pandemic, which I think, I've been to a protest, and we had masks on and everything, but I have to admit, I was right beside a bunch of people in this giant crowd. So it almost seemed like people were forgetting the danger that is around us, and forgetting about COVID, especially because COVID affects minority communities, Black people specifically, more acutely than it affects white people. What are you guys' thoughts on people remaining vigilant and just continuing to be aware of the threat that is in our country right now?
We are still in search of a vaccine, so we're still in search of more answers. We hear different things every day. The CDC comes up with new things to tell us every day. So we just have to do our part and remain as safe as possible. And me living in this bubble, I don't think anyone's being as clean and as like on top of things as we are here, but I think it's so necessary to still cover your mouths, social distance. Just don't be reckless. I've been seeing a lot of recklessness out there with some parties and without masks and all this kind of crazy stuff. It's just, use some common sense is really what I think needs to be said.
Going back to what we were just talking about fact checking, read different articles. Coronavirus is real. COVID-19 is happening. It's killing people. We've had over 100,000 people in the United States die from COVID-19. I think for me, we've come to a point where being not racist isn't really enough. Anti-racism is not a noun or an adjective, it's a verb. So you need to educate yourself, and you need to get out there and make change, because if you're not going to do it and you expect someone else to do it, they're expecting you to do it. So be anti-racist and actually make change.
I agree, Grace. I actually received some, on the social media note, I received some messages saying, what do you think signing petitions is actually going to do? But I would just say, keep continuing to do those tangible actions, keep continuing to be supportive and to be an ally, because we will make change. We can and we will.
I think that this problem is just so deeply rooted into our country that it's going to take so long to get the right answer that we want and the solution. And I think it all just really boils down to that the value of $1 in this country is worth more than a life. And we see it as the government and the economy is opening back up with COVID, but people are still dying. Like, on a national level, I don't think that there is as much care as there is on like these intimate levels in the community. So I'm just going to keep on making change within my community, and hopefully it'll be a domino effect.
Wow, well, thank you guys so much for this discussion. Seriously, I think that people who will be listening to this will not only recognize the good that each of you have done in your communities, but will also think of and be inspired to action in their own communities. So thank you guys so much.